Hello, and welcome again. This channel is called Aldsidu, which means old ways or old customs. We discuss the pre-Christian Germanic heathenry of the old Saxons as well as the old Scandinavians. Aldsidu does mean old customs or old ways. And this is part 2 in our series on heathen holy days and timekeeping. And in this video, I will discuss the days of the waning and waxing of the moon, and the origins of the names of the days of the week, as well as proving that the 7-day week is not Germanic in origin, but was brought into the Germanic mind with Christianity and the Roman world. So, as I stated in the previous video, my goal in these videos is to be the most comprehensive video on YouTube on the historical pre-Christian holy days and timekeeping, and to post more sources than any other. Please pause the video to write down the sources and to look them up and to prove the facts of what I'm saying. The old religion of the Germanic peoples was called fyrn, Aldsidu, or fornsiðr. These words for the religion means old ways or old customs. And we are discussing the pre-Christian religion of the Germanic and Scandinavian peoples. Speaking of which, as I said in the first video, Scandinavian peoples are Germanic peoples. Many don't know this today, but all Germanic peoples venerated the Asir, the Germanic gods, before Christianization. See the below 1st century map of Europe where you can see where the Germanic peoples lived, where the Asir were venerated. Please note, Germanic tribes did move as the centuries passed. Some moved to England. Britannia became Angleland, a Germanic tribe of Angles, English people, where England and the English language comes from. Of course, many Scandinavians moved to uninhabited Iceland. So over time, the Germanic peoples did expand, but this is where the Germanic peoples were predominantly, where the Asir were venerated. The Germanic languages are different from the other European languages. The timekeeping is even different than the others, which we'll discuss more in the video. Now, contrary to popular opinion, the 7-day week did originate in the Middle East and was brought into Europe with Christianity and the Bible story of the world being created in 6 days and Yahweh or Jehovah resting on the 7th day. Romans did not keep a period of time called a week until the 2nd century. After the Romans adopted an 8-day week, they later changed it to a 7-day week. Now, again, you can stop. There are many sources that say this. Many almanacs will say this, but this should be relatively common knowledge. In the flood story of the Assyro-Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh, the storm lasts for 7 days. The dove is sent out after 7 days, and the Noah-like character of Utnapishtim leaves the ark 7 days after it reaches the ground. So again, you can see my source. Now, the Proto-Indo-European peoples did not have a 7-day week. And when I say this, people get so mad. And they scream like, but Tuesday is after Tu, or Tyr, pronounced Tur. Wednesday is named after Woden or Odin. Thursday is named after Thor. Friday is named after Frigga. How can you say this? Well, I'll get to that. And it'll make perfect sense to you when I'm done. But the Greeks and the Romans in the 1st century, and in their New Testament written in the 1st century, and in their writings of the Church Fathers in the 1st, 2nd, and even early 3rd centuries, they did not have a word for week in Greek or in Latin. The New Testament and 1st and 2nd century Greek and Latin church texts counted days from the Sabbath. So, for example, Matthew chapter 28, verse 1, recounts the resurrection of Jesus. It literally states, after the Sabbath at dawn, one day after the Sabbath, Mary Magdalene with the other Mary came to the tomb. To be clear, the New Testament never says on the 1st day of the week, but it always says one day from the Sabbath. I don't care how Bible translations are done today, and I'm going to prove this shortly. This is consistent throughout the New Testament. There's not a word for weak in the New Testament because at that time no such word existed in the European mind. So, I'm not jumping up and down to say this, but I've been in heathenry over 20 years. I am 50 years old right now. But I was raised a Christian. The Sass family in Germany and those that came to America were Lutherans. I, in early life, read the Bible a lot. I got my bachelor's in music. I then got my master's in divinity and archaeology. And then later in my 20s, I abandoned it all. So I do have a master's degree in the subject. It's not a PhD, but my goodness, I studied at Hebrew University in Jerusalem for 2 years as a Gentile Germanic American individual. So I had 12 years of training throughout my life in Greek and Hebrew, more so Hebrew, even though I was raised a Goy or a Gentile. But long story short, here is the text of Matthew chapter 28, verse 1, the resurrection. By the way, you can look this up in Mark chapter 16 or in Luke chapter 24 or in John chapter 20. All these passages, the Greek is the same. After the Sabbaths, plural, it being dawn, eis mian sabbaton. This gets translated on the first day of the week, or in some Bibles even on Sunday. But this is how all the Greek New Testament is. Why? Because there's no way to say week. Because the Roman world felt the Jews were crazy people in the first century. They felt that they were lazy because they rested 1 out of every 7 days, which was like unconscionable to the Roman mind. So I'm not saying that I don't appreciate having a 2-day weekend today. Thank goodness the Puritans were afraid to break the biblical Sabbath and the sun god Sunday Sabbath, so we have 2 Sabbaths today. I rather like my weekend, so I don't attack the principle of Shabbat or Sabbath, taking a day off. But nonetheless, back to my point, Matthew 28:1, Mark 16:1, Luke 24:1, John 21, many passages throughout the rest of the Gospels, the book of Acts, the Pauline letters, the other minor epistles in the New Testament. I have a degree in this. I know it is a master's degree, not a PhD, but hey, an MA does count for something. And this is without doubt fact. You can argue it all you want, but this is fact. In the first century, there was no European word for a 7-day period of time. Even the early church fathers in the 2nd century were 100% consistent in counting days from the Sabbath, as there was no Roman or Greek word for week. Justin Martyr, who died in 165 AD, wrote in his dialogue with Trypho was a Jewish person, and naturally the Christians and Jews did lots of debating in the 1st and 2nd centuries. But what did Justin Martyr write? He wrote, "The first day after the Sabbath, remaining the first of all days, is called, however, the 8th, according to the number of all days in the cycle, and yet it remains the first." So this is a clear pattern in 1st and 2nd century Greek and Roman writings. There's an 8-day week that was first adopted by the Roman world late in the 1st century of the Common Era, and then later in the 2nd century this changed to a 7-day week. The more Christian Rome got, the more popular the 7-day week became. While I have a typo here, on my last slide, let's go back to it. I lost it. While I have a typo right here, the weekly calendar of 52 weeks just derives from the solar calendar. Dr. Andreas E. Zautner, the lunar solar calendar of Germanic peoples, page 41. No offense or buts. A calendar of 52 weeks that came into Rome was actually not even Christian driven at first, but as the Romans became more comfortable with the solar calendar, that's where the 52 weeks came from. Now, contrary to popular opinion, the names Thor's Day, Frigga's Day, Woden's Day, and Tuesday do not prove that the Germanic and Scandinavian peoples kept a 7-day week. Sadly, in the Germanic world, all things lead to Rome. The names were adopted after Christianization, and they were adopted first in Christian England. Here's one of many sources that you can get. This is an Oxford source. Now, let me give a full story. First, the Roman world started to adopt Christian ideas, especially as it became more and more Christian. The days of the week were first named for the classical planets in Latin. This naming system persisted alongside an ecclesiastical tradition of numbering the days in ecclesiastical Latin, beginning with Dominica, the Lord's Day, as the first day. The Greco-Roman gods associated the classical planets were rendered in their Interpretatio Germanica at some point during the late Roman Empire, yielding the Germanic tradition of names based on indigenous deities. Here's the source. So what does this mean? It basically means that the Greco-Roman gods, these names were given to the names of the planets, like Jupiter and Saturn, for example. Those are the names of Greek and Roman gods, deities. So Mars, another example. These are Roman names, Latin names for the deities. So, as the names of the week persisted to be spread throughout the Germanic world with Christianization, most of which was forced, this Roman idea of naming the days of the week after the classical planets continued, but since Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars were Roman god names, they just changed these names to the Germanic gods' names in the Germanic areas. So this is how Thor's Day came about today, because it's basically taking the Roman gods' names and changing it to the Germanic gods' names. So this is really a Roman practice. So in Christian England, Mars and Aries Day was equated with 2, the Norse Tyr. And Mercury for the 4th day of the week was equated with Woden or Odin. Jupiter Zeus was that of the 5th day of the week, and the Germanic cognate was Thor, same with the 6th day of Venus being equated with Frigga, wife of Odin. Please note, modern eclectic neo-pagans often argue Friday was named after Freya, but this is not the case. Please also note that Sunday and Monday are named for the sun and moon, and Saturday was for Saturn. While Sunni and Mani are indeed names of Germanic deities, Saturn is not a Germanic deity. There's lots of misinformation in Asatru. They like to claim that Satyr is a Germanic god, and this is where Saturday comes from, but it clearly comes from Saturn. And honestly, I grow tired of arguing over stuff like that. I don't argue anymore. I just post the evidence. And you can find this in many almanacs. You can find it in many books. Don't Google it, because there's so much misinformation on Google, whether it's about COVID or Asatru or anything and everything in between. So, contrary to popular opinion and shown clearly in the Eddas and the sagas and the poems in Old Saxon, the Germanic peoples had days of the moon waning and waxing. Remember, in the first video I showed a passage from Völuspá, the 6th stanza, which is the first book in the Poetic Edda, or the Codex Regius, and it talks about the moon being used to tell the years and time. This is very common in Germanic thought. There's also many passages in the Eddas and sagas on the waning and the waxing of the moon. So again, before the days of wristwatches and cell phones, any commenter can look up in the sky and tell when the lunar crescent is growing and when it gets full, and then when it wanes and gets back down to a tiny crescent, and then there's a new lunar crescent, etc. There's no arguing with what's in the sky. Every commenter can see it. They don't have to be a noble or a priest with deep astronomical mathematics. We're talking about common farmers. So let's read what the Poetic Edda says. Here's the source. Odin spoke, "Next, answer me well, if your wisdom avails, and you know well. Fathruthnir. Now, whence came the moon over the world of men that fares in the flaming sun? Fathruthnir spoke. Mundilfiri is he who created the moon and fathered the flaming sun. The round of the sky, each day they run to tell time for men. So here in this passage, later in the Poetic Edda, it's not just the moon that tells time, but it's the moon and the sun. Hence, per my first video, the Germanic peoples had a lunar solar calendar. They paid attention to both the sun and the moon. Modern Asatru ignores the moon 100%, and all of its holy days are solar. Odin spoke. Third, answer me well. If wise, you are called, if you know it. Fathruthnir now, whence came the day over mankind that fares, or night with the waning moon? Fathruthnir spoke. The father of day is Delling called, and the night was begotten by Nor. Full moon and new moon by the gods were fashioned to tell time for men. Notice this last passage in particular. Full moon and new moon by the gods were fashioned to tell time for men. So, there are many saga passages that I can post showing new moon and full moon importance and waning and waxing of the moon. It's all over the place in the sagas. I do understand that over time the peoples became Christian, and then suddenly we have words for sevens and weeks in the sagas, but no ifs, ands, or buts. You get to the Poetic or the Elder Edda, we see lots more of waning and waxing moon passages. Why? Because it's the Elder Edda. And the older things are, like in the Old Saxon poetry, okay, which, were pretty early. I mean, the writings of Bede and the Old Saxons are 500 years before Snorri, 400 and 500 years before Snorri. And here's a passage from the Old Saxon Heliant in around 830 of the Common Era. So I put the Heliant in runes. I understand that it was written with Latin letters, like our modern English is written with Latin letters, but I prefer Germanic runes, not Romanized Christianization. Nonetheless, here's the passage. Also, this is why the brilliant hill fort is called Jericho. Now, because I understand Hebrew very well, I know that Yericho in Hebrew means moon. So this is why the brilliant hill fort is called Jericho. There in Yehudah, Judea, it stands. It is made with walls. It is named after the moon. As I said, Jericho is named after the moon. The radiant constellation. It is not able to avoid time. Each day the moon, does as it does, waning or waxing, growing. So it is also done in this world here, in this middle yard. Mankind as a child goes and follows. The old die, but equally the young come growing old until word, or Old Norse Erther, the Nornir, the fates, they also take away. So no ifs, ands, or buts. We have plenty of passages like this where the Germanic passage of time is understood and shown clearly. This passage shows the Saxon understanding of fate and time. And as I've mentioned, Jericho means moon. And since the moon is the main celestial body that shows time to the Saxons, the author expounds on the Saxon understanding of time and how all is subject to word. And the Nornir, or in Old Saxon, Yeshepu, the shapers. Please also notice that the Saxons did not have days of the week. That came from the Hebrews to the Romans to the heathens, and really the Egyptians to the Romans and to the heathens. The Saxons had days of the moon, which waned and grew. This is how the Saxons understood time. So, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. Please check out our blog site. It's for free at www.aldsidu.com. Please visit us on Facebook in the group Aldsidu Saxon Heathenry, and please visit our blog. And thank you so much for watching. Part 3 is coming shortly.